Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Um, Welcome to the second Santa Cruz Queer History webinar. We're glad you're here. My name is Rob Darrow, and I'll be the facilitator for this webinar. These webinars are co-sponsored by the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History, or MA, and the Santa Cruz Diversity Center. We hope that when the pandemic is over that you'll come to Santa Cruz and visit the MA here in Santa Cruz to see the Santa Cruz Queer History exhibit in person. In the meantime, the exhibit is going to open online first on April 24th, so we look forward to seeing that. Part of moving towards that exhibit, we decided to offer these webinars during this kind of crazy time, and we're learning as we're going, and we appreciate your feedback. You can certainly do that by the chat room. If you have questions as we go along, please type them in the chat room, and let me go over some quick webinar protocols here. Thanks for muting your device, except for the panel members here. Please do use the chat. We'll have time at the end for questions. Oscar will answer those questions. If you want to hang out afterwards, you're welcome to do so. If you've got feedback or anything else, my email and my web address are there for you to do so. Or you can type it in the chat room at the end as well, because then we'll get that information. One of the fun parts last week is we all got invited to what hotel in Santa Cruz was on last week that invited us all to come visit?
Paradox.
The Paradox. So the Paradox invited us when the pandemic's over for all of us to go there. So anyway, so just to kind of review here, Santa Cruz County Queer History parallels the national LGBTQ history movement. Santa Cruz County people have impacted the national LGBTQ rights movement, and the national movement has impacted Santa Cruz. So it goes back and forth. We know that because of UC Santa Cruz and Cabrillo College opening in the 1960s in the Santa Cruz area, that had an impact as well. We like to think it was a give and take sort of piece, that Santa Cruz County in general has always been an inclusive community and embracing progressive kind of thinking throughout. And that's what helped create the space for what happened overall. As we think about the national LGBTQ history movement overall, the 1950s was what is now termed the Lavender Scare, where LGBTQ people were removed from government service in the military. That caused a reaction in the 50s and early 60s for LGBTQ organizations such as the Mattachine Society, which started in Los Angeles, and then the Daughters of Bolitas that opened in San Francisco. Some of the key dates in LGBTQ history is 1966 was Compton's Cafeteria riots in San Francisco, and then 1969 was the Stonewall riots in New York. Not too long after that, Santa Cruz organized with this group called LAGMU of many of the people here today were part of that organization, and we talked about that on our last webinar in 1974. And then in 1975, we had our first Santa Cruz Pride event, which is what we're going to talk about today. So that gives some of that background. So the title of this is The First Pride Event Causes Santa Cruz to Come Out in 1975. And I'll let the panel members kind of talk about that in a little bit. But just to give the background again for people listening, either on the recording or who may not have been here the last webinar we did, is that so LAGMU was the first sustaining and organized group in the county for LGBTQ people. They organized potlucks and roller skating and movie visits, and had a speakers bureau that spoke at schools. And then they organized the first Santa Cruz Pride in 1975. It was, I put it a week-long event, but it was really 4 days that went from Thursday through Saturday, that included workshops at Cabrillo, a concert at the Women's Club, a dance, and a picnic at San Lorenzo Park. We know that it was the third Pride in California after LA and San Francisco that began in the early 70s. And I wanted to start by sharing this press release of the first Pride. Larry Friedman, who's on this call, is the author of this document. I'm going to zoom in on it a little bit, and you can see here that it was dated June 12th, 1975. And again, this is one of the documents that's in the MA that you'll see as part of the exhibit. So this was to notify everybody. These are all different radio stations around Santa Cruz and TV stations. You can see KSBW and some of the other parts here. And one of the key paragraphs here I thought I would read says, I realize that homosexuality is a very controversial topic, but we feel that we deserve the rights accorded to other people in our society. We are responsible citizens struggling to be happy and lead healthy lives within our community. We are asking your help in publicizing our gay pride events to help reach out to gay people in the local area and to educate the general population as well. Your support is needed, as this is the first time in Santa Cruz County that such a large-scale event is being undertaken. And I'll just scroll down here and you can see the announcement that was given out to those different news articles. The music concert was done by Lou Harrison, which the panel members will talk about a little bit later. And then again, you can see it signed at the bottom by Larry. So that's that piece. And then the other piece here to share with you is also that year, the group got the County Board of Supervisors to pass a Pride Week proclamation, which was a challenge at the time. So you can see some of the words and the wording of that there. And then here is the whole schedule for that week. You can see it started on June 19th with the potluck dinner. Friday, June 20th was the Lou Harrison music concert. Then June 21st was the day of workshops. And then there was a dance Saturday night. And then the picnic at San Lorenzo Park took place after that. So that's the history I wanted to share to get started. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so we can hear from the people who are on the screen. And I'm going to start by just asking the first question, which is, can you to have all of you to share a little bit about what you were doing in Santa Cruz in 1975 and what your role was in planning that. And Dan, I'm going to start with you. If you wouldn't mind, we'll go Dan and then David. And then we'll do Arthur and then Larry, and then Dave Kirk will do you on the phone afterwards. So Dan, you want to start?
I come down to Santa Cruz in about 1973 from San Francisco, but I grew up in Nebraska. And I was married to a woman, and I got interested in feminism, and then I got interested in my own masculine orientation and how to change some of the roles and patterns. And I gradually realized that I was gay and came out in Santa Cruz about that year. By 74, I was partnered up. And then things happened where I met a few people from men's groups and decided that I really wanted to be in a group with just gay men, not a mixed group or a straight group. So there's a series of different things happened, and that men's group, eventually I met other gay people, and it kind of evolved into me meeting a couple of other people, Sean, Laughing Tree, and lo and behold, we started a gay group, which we'll get into a little later.
Great. David, you want to talk about your role in the beginnings?
Sure. I was in my last year at UC Santa Cruz trying to graduate, fulfilling all those last quarter requirements. And I was also just coming out as a young gay man, and I loved being in Santa Cruz. It was such a great place for me at that time. I was always kind of socially and politically minded, and there were so many ways of being involved in it. It was kind of the end of the Vietnam War era with protests, and it was also a real strong feminist era, and Santa Cruz was a real central place for feminist thought and action at that time. And I was a politics major at UC Santa Cruz, so everything kind of fit together in my life in terms of getting involved in community activities. And the big statement at that time, which is still true, is that the personal is political. So the feminist and the socialist feminist movement really fit my sense of development, of coming out as both a personal and a political kind of phenomenon. And I met Dan and Larry on this call, and Sean, who sadly isn't here, but I met them all at a men's group in the fall of '74. And that was really fun and led to really good things, marriage and lifelong friendships. And And we had a house. We had a men's collective house in Soquel in the Monterey Bay Highlands or whatever it was called, and close to Cabrillo College. And Cabrillo was a great place because we had a couple of faculty members there, or staff members, Billy Paul and who's the other one?
Ida Murray.
Ida Murray and Billy Paul were kind of our key people on the inside that were so helpful to us in terms of getting space and helping us form a student group there. I don't think any of us were students at that time, except for maybe Arthur. I think Arthur worked there. And it was a perfect kind of a setting because it was mid-county and in a community college. It's cuts across class lines, and because the university was up on a hill and kind of remote from the community. So it drew people in from all over the community and a great cross section. And I think I'll have that be the end of my introduction.
Great. And then David and Dan, do you want to share where you live now?
Oh yeah, we live on Salt Spring Island in British Columbia, where we've lived for almost 11 years. We both retired from our jobs in Santa Cruz and moved up here and immigrated actually. So we're dual citizens now. And but we both lived in Santa Cruz for like 3 decades. So Santa Cruz is a really special place for both of us.
Great. I'm going to move on to Arthur. And then Arthur, why don't you start by introducing yourself and sharing where you live, and then share a little bit of your background.
I'm Arthur Corbin. I'm 70 years old. I came to Santa Cruz, I think, in late 74, 75. I had been one of the founders of the Stanford Gay Group. And to add to the Pride event, Stanford had their first gay Pride event in May 74. And I was involved with that. And I have information on that for anyone who wants it, including the flyers that were produced. I don't remember much about the Pride event in Santa Cruz. I remember the picnic. I remember the Lou Harrison concert vaguely. But I do know it drew in a lot of people and was a big success.
Great. Larry, you want to talk a little bit about your involvement and where you are?
Well, I'm in Santa Cruz, and I moved here in 71 from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and became a social worker for a little while, and was a waiter for a little while, was straight identified, was noting attractions to men, but I was still dating women. And in 74, I was living with a couple of other guys, and one of those guys was bisexual and was involved with a men's group. And I was very aware of the feminist movement and feminist support groups. Well, this was a men's feminist support group. And in that group, eventually, David, I think, but Dan for sure was part of that. And I was working as a waiter at that time, and I really don't remember how we started at Cabrillo, but I was one of the founders, and I was an English literature major, so I was good at writing like newsletters and stuff and keeping minutes, and I was pretty organized, and I was also pretty social and loved to plan social events more than political stuff, but became political through the group. That's it.
Great. And Dave Kirk, you want to introduce yourself, where you live, what you've done, and what brings you here today, and how you're connected?
Well, I was living in Santa Cruz. I worked at UCSC. I started there in 1972, working in media services. Became interested in the men's group thing. I believed I joined the group that they were talking about in 1974. And then immediately got involved with the Lagbu stuff. I was already out, so there was no, questions, especially about that. The planning, do we want to talk about anything beyond that? I'm still living in Santa Cruz. Worked at the university, worked up there for 30 years.
Do you remember how you met up with these guys originally?
I think I answered an ad in the paper, or somehow the men's group had an ad, or somebody told me about it or something, and I phoned in and they said, here's where we're going to meet. Come join the meeting.
Great.
And I did. There were about 20 or so men at the meeting, and just got involved with everything that they were planning and doing, and helped what I could with the starting of this thing at Cabrillo. I'm a joiner and an expediter.
Great. So the next question really is about, how did you get the idea for doing a series of Pride events? And so I'll let any one of you kind of join in and jump in on that question. You know, where did that idea come from, or how do you think it developed?
Well, I'll start. I think there were in San Francisco, you know, being close to San Francisco, just 70 miles away, a lot of us were kind of really plugged into what was going on there. And San Francisco was a hotbed of lesbian and gay activism going way back, but I believe they had their first Pride in like 71 or so. And I wasn't out yet or going up there, but I think that kind of spurred us on. And we were thinking that, you know, the time is right, the place is right. It was a heady era where I think we were young and we felt limitless and felt like we could do anything we wanted to do, and we're somewhat fearless, and maybe foolishly so, but we were pretty gutsy. And I think we probably discussed having a parade, but we're worried that no one would show up, or it would be too scary, or there'd be too much opposition. So I think we wisely, the first couple of years, decided to have a multi-day event that was multifaceted with lots of different activities. And I think that made it a really strong, meaningful Pride that brought a lot of people out. And I like those kind of prides today, you know, that aren't just parades. And one thing I forgot to mention, and with having Dave here on the call, is that Dave and I videotaped the entire 4-day event. And that was pretty cutting edge, and, you know, everything is video today, but, you know, we were using prehistoric equipment that, you know, Dave was able to borrow from UCSC. And I remember spending many long evenings at UCSC late into the night, you know, editing that thing, because, you know, those of us who've been involved in video know that the time and the power comes in the editing. You know, that's where you create, you know, a really good piece. So that video is still around. It's not the best quality, but it's really fun to see. If none of you have seen it, I advise that you watch it.
Let's go. Yeah, let's go back to that in a little bit. How about the rest of you? How did the idea come up? And you had this multi-day event. So what are some of the things that, how those ideas come up, or who did the planning?
Well,
Go ahead,
Dan.
Larry.
Okay, I think that it was a group effort. Because we were having meetings regularly at the college, and there were a lot of women as well as men. Unfortunately, none are on this call today, but there were quite a few activist women, and I think it just snowballed. And I don't remember who had the connection to Lou Harrison, because he was already kind of a famous and somewhat reclusive guy, but that was a real coup. Planning a dance was easy. Planning a potluck, we had done potlucks a lot. Planning all the workshops, which was thankfully a beautiful day, so we had a lot of them outside, but they were, you know, it was all done at Cabrillo because we were a student group there. But I don't recall any one person saying, oh, let's have a dance, or let's do X, Y, and Z workshops. And planning the whole picnic thing with speakers and all. I mean, it was a huge undertaking. I just can't believe that we did it, and we did it well.
Dan, you want to add to that?
Sure. I have some details, but, you know, as I sit here, I'm thinking, hearing Arthur talk when he arrived, I think Arthur must have inspired the idea if he'd already been involved in a group and had those connections. Maybe, you know, I don't know what kind of things that the group at Stanford did, but he might have just had a lot of ideas about it that just kind of got us going. The other question is San Jose, I remember going over to San Jose to their gay group, and it might have been, and also to Stanford, that might have been after our first Pride, but because in the program for the potluck, it said we were inviting other gay groups in the area. And I don't remember any other gay groups, but maybe Stanford or San Jose had their group going by then. Anyway, when and another thing Arthur might know, Bill Mitchell, I think, graduated in music from Stanford, Arthur's partner at the time, and he might have had the connection with Lou Harrison. I always say Sean went out and did this, but didn't know Lou from anybody, and I don't know who did to even know that he lived in Aptos. So that would be something, if anyone can remember that whole idea. Lou was a gay man. He was 58. He became a renowned kind of new music gamelan figure in American music. And at that time he was 58, and it's kind of hard to believe that. And he died in
2003.
2003. He was actually kind of mid-career. He'd already had a tremendous start, but thinking of how we happened to get him to agree to do that, he didn't do a particularly gay music. And I'm wondering if that was one of our efforts, was to reach straight people. And I wonder if that drew in some community people, especially people who were in music. It was held at the Women's Center, and I remember it being quite well attended, and not the kind of music that, would necessarily at that time attract gay people. And so that's interesting. We'll probably hold up a poster in a minute, but I made some notes. I kind of take credit for deciding that we should do workshops, or at least the idea, because I'd had a lot of experience in political groups, since not too much, but one, I thought it was good that people would talk to each other and share their ideas, and meet each other. It was one of the only opportunities, except maybe the picnic, where we could just sit down with new people and talk about our feelings. Some of the workshops, and there were a lot, and I don't know, I'm going to turn my head and read them, but there was one on gay minors, ageism, bisexuality, movement and body work, counseling, gay politics, self-defense, and S&M. And, it seems very contemporary now reading those. It seems like those things could just be repeated today, almost the same. We're still, those are still topics of interest. And we had pretty good attendance at those. I could only be at one at a time, but they were probably hour-long workshops scattered from 9 in the morning till 5 at night. And we had a lunch break. And
about how many people were in those, Dan?
Oh, some are small, maybe 5 or 6. None particularly for women.
I think there was one on socialist feminism.
Yeah, it must have been.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty mixed groups. The only other thing I might talk about would just be some of the people that also at the same day, there was a film shown inside called Sandy and Maddie's Family, which was,
Oh, right.
I don't know if that was about gay parents, or I'm sure it wasn't about their families, their parents. I'd love to find that old film.
They were lesbian women who were in the middle of divorce with their 2 husbands.
Oh.
And they were facing just a blizzard of opposition from the courts. And they were told they could not live together with children under the same roof. They were having trouble raising enough money for attorneys. They ended up living across the hall from each other in an apartment building to meet the terms of the divorce agreements. And their husbands continued to harass them. And this was also a way for them to raise money in order to support themselves while they were in these brutal divorce proceedings. And I think they were there.
Oh, at the first Pride?
I think so.
Okay. And as far as more of the planning, the planning perspectives, do you remember any more about the planning part, Arthur? Or Dan was talking about perhaps some of those ideas came from you. Do you recall any of that?
I don't recall that, but I can tell you Lou Harris was widely respected in the music community, and he was very typical of gay artists who are in the fringe and creating a lot of excitement with something unusual. And during the age years, there was a curmudgeon, a lesbian woman in New York, and I'm forgetting her name, but she was asked to comment about gays in culture. And she said, if you take gays out of the culture, you're left with hee-haw.
Great. Hey, Dave Kirk, do you have any thoughts about the organization or the planning of this event, or any aspect of it you want to add to?
Yeah, I don't know who came up with the idea of documenting the event or the events. All I know is I somehow said, I'll take care of that, because I had worked at media services at the university, had access to all this video equipment. And as David Payne said, it was very, I'm going to say Neolithic, megalithic. It was huge. It was heavy. These Sony packs you had to carry around like Sherpas. Would have microphones. You had to have batteries, keeping this thing going that looked like car batteries. And Jude and David Payne said, we formed a little mini committee and said, we'll do this. And during the 4 days of the events, we were lugging the equipment around. I think we had 2 cameras and all the equipment that went with it, and would just set up and, interview people, photograph certain parts of the workshops. We photographed some of the concert. I don't think any of the dance got recorded, but we did do a lot of coverage of the picnic and interviewing people and showing the events and this sort of stuff. As David said, heck on wheels, the editing process was really extreme. The many, many hours you won't believe today when you think you could edit and do all this stuff on a computer off of film from your iPhone and just sit there and look at it and punch buttons. There you had to wind, rewind, and you dubbed off the original tape, the piece of tape you wanted, onto another tape. And you really couldn't make absolute perfect cuts. It was very nerve-wracking and time-consuming. We're lucky we came out with the documentary that we came out with.
So David Payne, did you have like a list of things you wanted to film, or you just filmed everything? And then were there any significant moments in the filming process that you recall at all?
I think we just kind of did a scatter shot of, getting as much footage as we could, and then we tried to make it more of a story, in the editing room, and I remember doing things like, making sure it wasn't just talking heads, but showing some action, and there were some really poignant interviews that we did, and then of course capturing the music at the park, because we didn't do any footage of the dance, which is too bad, but we had some really great footage of Patty Maxine and Joey Richards, I think was his name, at the park. And so I think it had a good flow to it. And I think it's such a great historical document. Unfortunately, it was because of the analog nature of it and, the changing technology, we don't really have a good, digital copy of it. But it is what it is. And
we'll have to have
I was going to say one more thing on a related topic about how the whole thing came together. We did have meetings at Cabrillo, but so much of the planning and the details took place not really through committees, because we didn't have committees, but there was such a dispersal of activity and action that people took on different parts of it. I remember meetings at our house in Soquel with Dan and Judith at our kitchen table, and Sean and Larry, and people were buzzing all around, taking care of all the different parts of it. So there wasn't really a hierarchy of officers or, people saying, you do this, you do that. People just volunteered, I'll do that. And it kind of, somewhat magically, all came together, because we were all pretty high energy. people and excited about the project.
I think David's not missing talking about the one scene he particularly liked filming, and too bad Sean's not here. Sean Laughing Tree, one of the founders, one of the members in our group was a very, very handsome surfer type guy named Steve Key. And there's one scene in the video where Sean and Steve get into a romantic activity, and they're just laying there in the sun.
Caressing. They're
laying
caressing
in the sun, and I think they were kissing a little, and that was really an interesting scene. And then the other thing is, I think in terms of musicians, I might be confused. I think this might have been at the workshops. We had time to even have some music events, and there was a Woody from San Francisco, singer, and then Liz Magumba. And I think they might have been more in the Saturday workshops and not.
No, Liz sang at the park.
Yeah.
For that.
And
there are also some really nice scenes of beautiful women in the video too. I remember who was the one that Pam, blonde Pam that Judith was asking about. I wonder whatever happened to her. And so we did, it wasn't just focused on gay men. That was a nice thing about LAGMU, Lesbian and Gay Men's Union, that we did have a pretty good, union, of lesbians and gay men at the time.
Larry, would you like to talk a little bit more about some of your memories from the event itself, in addition to what's been shared?
Sure. Well, sure. I remember the potluck at the college cafeteria at Cabrillo, and it was really well attended. I remember going to workshops outdoors on the lawn, and just that was a great day. I remember the women's club host location for Lou Harrison's concert, which was certainly the first time I'd ever heard that kind of music. He, as was mentioned, he was becoming a world famous composer of Eastern music in particular. And excuse me, and certainly the Pride, and of course the tug of war, which was like the ultimate thing, which I don't know.
Why don't you talk a little? Yeah, go ahead. Let's talk about the tug of war, because that's a big thing that's talked about by a lot of people. Why don't you talk about that?
Sure. So honestly, I don't know how it got organized, but all the women were on one side of the rope and all the men were on the other side of the rope, and it was pretty evenly matched in terms of numbers, and it was across the San Lorenzo River. It was on one side were the women, on the other side were the men. And a bunch of men went over to help the women because the women weren't quite as strong as the men. But it was a great time. And, there were lesbian separatists, but it wasn't a big thing. We were all in this together. And that was a high point of the whole day, in my opinion.
And Dave Kirk with a megaphone was like the cheerleader. He kind of gave us some coaching to get people to kind of act in unison to be a little bit more coordinated with the rope.
Yes.
But
Dave Kirk, you remember that?
It was all very good.
Oh yes.
Tell us about that.
I borrowed the tug of war rope from the PE department at UCSC, along with the megaphone. So I didn't realize at the time. I went others. Did you have to have a tug of war rope? The guy gave me the funny look. Says, "Well, yes." And he opened this cupboard, and 50 feet of rope that is about 1.5 inches to 2 inches round is a load of rope. And I had to take the car, and I had to 3 people help haul it and put it in the trunk of the car at the time. Megaphone was easy. Speaking of the event of the day, some of the other events that took place that I recall because I organized them as such, we had sack races. We had a local food store at one time.
Right.
that had all sorts of stuff. And I went and said, "You got any old chicken feed sacks?" And they said, "Oh, sure, go help yourself." So I took about 20 sacks away, and we used those to have sack races and three-legged races. I was sort of very into, what I call church camp, simple-minded recreation stuff. And one of the other events that I remember was the egg toss, that you got two people coupling and you took a raw egg and you tossed it to the other person, and then they stepped back 2 paces and you tossed it back and forth, getting further and further apart. And as long as the egg didn't break, you were a winner. And people really got into that, as I recall, until you went squish, and then people had raw egg all over their hands. But those are the events we had. The people with the three-legged race. People putting separate legs in the sacks and holding them at the same time and running. A lot of fun. I mean, it was just silly fun, but people were having a good time. But it's true. The big end of it was the tug of war across the river. It's hard to imagine when you look at the San Lorenzo River today. I mean, the sides were the same as those, but it wasn't filled with trees and strange vegetation and things like that. You could wade out across the thing, ankle deep or calf deep in the water. So people, didn't mind just trudging across the river and having, the great tug. End of story.
So Dave Kirk, I'll start with you on this next question. So maybe you could talk about how many people you think were there, and then how did you know as you were going through it that it was successful?
Well, a huge crowd. I mean, truly, at the Women's Center, when we were filming that, I think they had seats set up for about 200 people, or 150 plus, because there were row after row after row of seats. And we had the camera set up down at the end of the aisle to shoot down the front. And the place was packed. So we had a turnout for that. I don't have total full memories of the potluck, but the potlucks, we always had a great number of people show up to those out at Cabrillo. The picnic in the park, I don't know. Since we were wandering around, it was like David and I and Jude weren't exactly enjoying the day as such for that part of the day. And I can't remember who was filming while I was exhorting the troops there in the games and things. But
there
were scads and scads of people. I mean, I just remember lots and lots of people having a good time in the park. I'm going to estimate like 200, maybe more.
Oh, at least.
It just seemed like a great number of people.
I would say.
And just to throw in one thing about the video, the title of the video is called "It's About Time," and we interviewed a husband and wife. It's just an absolutely incredible, synchronicity of things, that were out-of-towners who had come to Santa Cruz and came over to the park and thought this was all very interesting. And we interviewed them. And the opening of the video is we're interviewing them and telling them, well, what do you think about, a gay event and everything? And either the husband or the wife, I can't remember which, says, "It's about time." And this was back in 1975. So they were very open-minded people, and that gave us the title for the video and a good opening for the thing.
Great. Larry, how did you know it was successful?
First of all, I was having a blast. Everybody, I mean, I've seen the video, as rough as it is. You can just see how many people were having such a great time. It was beautiful weather, men with their shirts off. Who doesn't like that? From my point of view. The stage production, the rally with the music, different musicians playing and speakers, it just, it was a huge turnout. I mean, now in Santa Cruz, there's, a few thousand people that show up, but for the first one, I would say 200 to 300 people were there.
Do you think you
men and women.
were you surprised that many people
I
showed up?
was. I was totally surprised. Yes, it was awesome. And like I said, just the energy of everybody being out together, out in public together, participating in the games. I just thought it was an amazing thing.
Arthur, what are you holding up there? I've now added, I'm showing everybody what you're holding up. Do you want to talk about what you're showing?
That's Pam Carlson.
Oh, Pam Carlson, right.
Hannigan. And it's from the Pajaronian Green Sheet article about me as an activist in Santa Cruz. This was October 75. And when you mentioned Pam, I remembered this photo. And that's at Cabrillo at one of our meetings.
Yeah, that's become.
Huh. Great.
Is that Steve Hannigan? Is that Steve Hannigan in there with her?
Carlson. It was when you could smoke inside.
Yeah. Dan or David, you want to share some of your success memories?
People.
Well, I concur.
Great. David, you want to talk about how did you know it was successful?
Well, I concur with Dave and Arthur and Larry that, the numbers of people who attended was, way more than I thought. We were all kind of scared that nobody would come, and it was such a great cross section of people. It seemed like to me, it wasn't just Cabrillo students or UC Santa Cruz students, or working people, and a lot of women, kind of equal numbers of men and women, and just very high spirited and fun and social, and even the workshops were fun. You don't think about workshops being necessarily fun, but a lot of spirited conversation, and as Dan mentioned, beautiful day outside at Cabrillo, and I wish I remembered the dance more, but I'm sure that was really successful. I remember we charged $1. I was thinking it was $2, but I saw on the poster it was $1 to get in. And Dan and I were talking earlier, we don't know where we got the money to put this thing on, because we must have had to have money for permits and to hire bands and all that, but maybe we didn't have any money, so I don't know where the money came from. I guess we all chipped in, and then the dance helped provide some money. But just really fun, and I think it just obviously created and this will be a answer to a question you're going to ask in a little while, but it led to so many good things in our community. It strengthened the community, and it was such a good public presence. It created a public presence of gays and lesbians in the community.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about that too, that when I was talking about the makeout scene in the park, I think what was really amazing is that this was pretty amazing to attend something in a public place. I'd never seen men kissing in public, really, and it's not like there were people sitting around watching it, straight people or whatever, but there we were, just right there kissing. I'm sure there was other people kissing, so that was really neat. And then the other thing I was going to mention is there's a couple people we missed. Joey Richards sang. He's no longer around. And then Alina Smith and Diane Ramsey read poetry. Diane Ramsey had been in prison, and I have 2 or 3 of her chapbooks. Amazing poet. So it was all kinds of entertainment. And in terms of money, I don't think anybody charged anything. I think that probably I don't even know if Cabrillo charged for rooms. And we had, as we said, Ida Murray and Billy Paul. Ida was the school health person, and Billy was like student activities. And I made a suggestion, and I want to do it right here, that we dedicate this webinar to Ida Murray and Billy Paul, who are both deceased. But Billy worked at Cabrillo until she was 90, and Ida until she was 78. Billy was on a contract, but these are amazing people for that time that just took this on without any question, and just did everything they could to make sure our organization was a success. And we never used Cabrillo College really in our identifications. there's technicality whether it was the Cabrillo College group or not, but we never made much of a deal probably in our publicity. It was just something was held there, but we didn't, that wasn't part of our logo. And so anyway, the money thing's really mysterious because it must have
You don't
cost,
remember who the treasurer was, huh?
gosh, no.
Could have been Bill.
Could have been Bill, yeah. That's
He
a good.
took the money.
But I think oh, the other thing was I was going to say was that, oh, the dance, the Sweet Chariot. It was a dyke band from San Francisco, and I hope that somebody could remember how we got them or how we knew of them. But interestingly, I looked up on Google today just to see. Never know what you'll find, and there is still a Sweet Chariot band in San Francisco, and it's a bunch of long-haired hippie-looking guys. So,
Guys.
yeah, guys. So that's probably not them. Could be these days. They look pretty old. But this was a blues and jazz band. So I don't remember that. I remember the music being very danceable.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not quite the right terminology, but anybody remember the band?
Well, I remember them, and I remember them being very danceable,
Oh, okay.
and that they were an all-women's band from San Francisco.
Hmm.
That's all I remember.
And do any of you remember who danced with who in the dance or anything like that?
Well, I think we all danced with everybody. You know, it was
Okay.
men and women and every possible combination.
Great. So I wanted to check in with Oscar, who's kind of been watching the chat room, and see if you had any other questions before we move to our final question. Oscar, anything you want to add or ask?
Nope. So far, we've only had only introductions. No questions.
Okay. Anything else you want to ask?
Just seeing what kind of hardships they kind of faced, either from the public or the city council.
Oh, we haven't talked about the proclamation.
Yeah. All right. So what are challenges, hardships? What are some of those? What are your answers to those questions? Who wants to start? Dave Kirk, were you involved in that at all? Any hardships?
No, I have vague recollections of maybe going to the meeting or one of the meetings, but not with the actual proclamation business and being there when they voted or anything like that.
Dan, you want to talk about that?
No, in fact, I can't even remember being at the supervisors meeting. I did see that we had called it the Pride Weekend and that thing you held up, and that they wanted it something like Gay Education Week in order to vote for it. But you know, I don't know if which one actually is the title of it was the first proclamation for gay pride, probably definitely in California. I don't even know if San Francisco had gotten that kind of a government recognition.
Arthur, any thoughts from you on that?
I remember working on the non-discrimination ordinance. I remember talking with the supervisors individually. It's a small county, so it was easy to see the supervisors and talk with them. And except for Forbes, who was a former military man, they were pretty supportive and would listen to us and support us.
What was the first name of the person named Smith that was a supervisor? I don't remember a Smith.
I don't either. Yeah.
Hold it, I have it.
While he's looking for that, were there any other hardships that occurred as part of putting on the event?
There were kind of, conservative gadflies in the community. Hilda Lands was infamous for coming to lots of Board of Supervisors meetings and complaining about lots of liberal or progressive topics. But, she hated gay people, and she was quite vocal. She would pay for ads in the newspaper, that were very anti-gay. And this continued on through the Briggs Initiative years and the Anita Bryant years, and she's the kind of person that would have been like best friends with Anita Bryant if they knew each other.
Hadn't she survived the Russian pogrom, whatever it was? I think she had gotten out of Russia because she hated communism so much. I think I remember she had a.
Yeah, but there were others. I can't think of any specifically, but there was a, Santa Cruz has a conservative underbelly, and especially during that time, it was a transitional time, in the 60s and 70s when, prior to Cabrillo and prior to UC Santa Cruz was very conservative. It had a lot of retirees and people with second homes, and it was fairly isolated, from the Bay Area. It's not like it is now. So it was a pretty gutsy thing that we did in terms of not just us, but everything that happened at that time with the various movements, anti-war, feminist movement, anti-racism movements. They kind of shook the place up. And so that's why it was an exciting time to be there.
Arthur, were you able to find the name?
Cecil Smith.
Oh,
I remember him. Yeah.
Great. So by way of kind of closing this out, and I want to hear from all of you on this one is, so, as you've shared with me, as we've talked about this, the first Pride event was a way of helping LGBTQ people throughout the county to come out. I know that LGBTQ was not a term back then, but it really helped the whole Santa Cruz community to come out. So I wondered if you want to comment on that and talk a little bit about what the lasting legacy of the first Pride was as you reflect back on that. So who'd like to start with that question?
Well, I don't know how the community, again, it's just things coming together, but when Anita Bryant thing came along and then the Briggs, there had to be something in place that would get the community together, and I guess it was LAGMU, because if not, we would have had to start from scratch, and that was only a year or two later when everything was coming down on gay people, from different directions in the U.S. So
yeah,
I guess that's our legacy.
And Dave Kirk, can you recall what the Pride led to?
Well, I think in just speaking in general, that it left a really good feeling, we'll say, in Santa Cruz with the gay and lesbian population and people in general, that one, we weren't child molesters, we were out, murdering people, we weren't doing terrible things, just everyday normal people having a good time at an outdoor picnic and event. And the following year when we did the parade, I think the very next year we finally did a parade, but I think it really laid the groundwork community-wise of the county for people to be prepared for more events, for more acceptance, a little more of everything. I think it really helped open things up.
Great. Arthur, your thoughts?
All of us were ready for community and for social events, and most of us had a lot of skills at doing that. And so there was also a lot of us, and we were working in key jobs. We were well liked outside of the gay community, and people wanted to help us. And it was very much in the spirit of the times.
Great. Larry, your thoughts about the legacy that you all moved forward, or some of the things that grew out of the Pride event?
Sure. I know for me personally, it was an incredibly empowering experience. I'd only been out for a year. And I think for so many, the numbers, the strength in numbers was the beginning of a snowball effect, that we could be open, that we could be out in the daylight, that we had such huge numbers. And I think it is the beginning of what led to the strong outpouring of support for the anti-Anita Bryant stuff, the Briggs Initiative that was very well organized in Santa Cruz. And, eventually the Gay Diversity Center, which came out of the Gay and Lesbian Center, which all of that sprung from the original LAGMU and the original Pride.
Great. David?
I was thinking about, prior to LAGMU, there really wasn't much going on in Santa Cruz besides the bars in terms of places and the cruising areas for gay people to meet. So it's really great to establish these friendship networks and common project networks. And so it was kind of the beginning of a network in a way. And also there wasn't a lot before LAGMU where men and women worked together. I mean, we had our conflicts and it wasn't always, a perfect working together, but this was a mechanism that became a foundation for future work against the Briggs Initiative and then all the AIDS plague work that occurred in the 80s and 90s, and then the foundation for the Diversity Center. And it was just such a good basis that got established. And for me personally, I met my husband, and I met my longtime friends, Larry and Sean, and I mean, I got some boyfriends, and so it was just a great kind of coming together for me of me too. I just come out like 6 months before this, so it was such an important period, for myself personally.
Dave Kirk, any final thoughts from you besides that?
No, I think everybody really summed it up really well.
Anybody else?
There was something I worked on. There was a gay man, a Mexican, who was a teacher in special ed. And someone had found a personals ad and turned him into the state board on a morality charge. He got in touch with me and he asked for assistance because he had to go through in front of a peer group for review to see if he would be able to keep his job. And we came up with the idea of putting together a scrapbook of photos of his classroom and his students and the work they were doing, because I couldn't go into the meeting with him. It was a closed door meeting. And we also couldn't publicize that the meeting was coming up. And we went to Sacramento. We had no idea what to expect. There were 4 teachers on the panel. And hearing took about an hour and a half. And he came out and he said he had a really good feeling about it. And we found out 3 months later that they decided not to remove his teaching certificate, but he was given a warning that in a confidential file, it would be listed that if he ever did this again, he would lose his teaching certificate. So there was a lot of victories like that were not publicized.
That support system sounds like it developed from LAGMU and all those relationships.
Yes.
Yeah.
I noticed that Evan had chatted in something about another performer or something. Evan, I'm not sure if you can speak.
Oh, they answered that question. There was another name on that bill, but it turns out that it was the boyfriend of Lou Harrison.
Bill Colvig.
Bill Colvig. Right.
I wasn't sure who that was.
Yeah.
Oh, and I mentioned to them that I was in a choir in Monterey called the Camarada Singers, and we've sung several of Lou Harrison's pieces.
Right.
We'll have to do a separate webinar just about Lou Harrison and his legacy.
Absolutely.
I know that Larry's husband's done a lot of work on that.
Very much. Yeah, very much.
Anything else from the panelists before we close out this webinar? Anything else anybody wants to add?
If you want to see an artifact from the period, go to the Student Union, to the top floor in the northeast office. There's a desk there made of 2x2s and a door. And it was a desk that Bill and I had in our apartment.
At Cabrillo College?
It's at Cabrillo College.
Okay. Any other memories, Dave Kirk, before we sign off? Anything else?
Are we going to have questions from our viewers after we sign off then?
I don't know. Are there, Oscar, any other questions?
Sally, Chris?
Or no other questions?
No other questions.
So all could turn on their mics if anyone wants to say anything.
Well, I think before we do that, I want to finish this out, and then we can kind of have our hangout time.
Yeah,
So
that's what I mean. After party.
the after, yeah, the after party. Let me get my final slide out. So just so everybody knows, we're the webinars will continue on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We've got some other great topics. We've got April almost filled in, and that I'll show you this slide in just a minute. I'm still learning how to manipulate around here all this stuff. But tune in every Tuesday and Thursday here at 4 o'clock. We'll get the word out better than we have in the past. We're continuing to look at these stories, what stories are available. We're interested in your artifacts. The future webinars next week, we're going to talk about the history of the Diversity Center and the start of gay men's volleyball. So those are two of the topics that are coming up. And we've got some great webinars about the different youth groups that developed over the years. Some of the first ones in Santa Cruz and Watsonville will be part of that as well. So finally, I want to just thank everybody for being here. Appreciate all the panelists. If there was a virtual applause, then we would do that at this point. But I guess we can all make that noise. So with that, there we go. Yay, there we go. With that, I'm going to stop the recording, and then if we want to stick around and have any other conversations, we can do that.